The desert doesn't give. It only takes. For Lyra Vale, it had already taken everything. Her family, her home, her belief that justice was anything more than a word whispered by fools. Now it was coming for the one thing she had left, her humanity. She was riding through the blood-red canyons of the Arizona Territory, a ghost in a land of ghosts. Her only companions were a stubborn horse named Dust Devil and the faded medical journal that was all she had left of her father. She was looking for a place to start over, a small piece of land to bury the past. But the past doesn't stay buried out here. It waits. And on a day when the sun was a merciless hammer in the sky, she found something that would change her life forever. It was a choice. Let an enemy of her people die in the dirt where he lay, or risk a gruesome death to save him. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that this man was no ordinary warrior, and her single act of compassion had just lit the fuse on a powder keg that was about to blow the entire territory sky high. She was about to find herself hunted by a ruthless land baron, the United States cavalry, and the very people she was trying to save. The heat was a living thing in the canyon, a shimmering wall that baked the life from the cracked earth. Lyra pulled her father's worn hat down, shading her eyes as she guided Dust Devil along what passed for a trail. It had been 3 months since the fire, 3 months since she'd buried her parents on the blackened patch of ground that now belonged to a man named Silas Kane. At 22, she was a woman forged in loss. Her father, Dr. Alistair Vale, had been a man of books and healing in a land that only respected bullets. He'd taught her everything he knew, how to set a bone, stitch a wound, which herbs could break a fever. It was his legacy, the one thing Kane's hired guns couldn't burn. Suddenly, Dust Devil stumbled, letting out a nervous snort. Lyra pulled back on the reins, her eyes scanning the ground. It wasn't a rock. It was a stain, a dark, ugly patch soaking into the sand, swarming with black flies. Her hand, almost without thinking, went to the Colt Peacemaker holstered on her hip. The cold weight of it was a constant, uncomfortable reminder of the new world she lived in. A world where her father's lessons felt like a dream. A trail of scuffed gravel led from the stain toward a cluster of sun-bleached boulders. Then she heard it, a sound that cut through the oppressive silence. A groan, thin and raw. It wasn't the wind. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She slipped from the saddle, drawing the Colt. She moved with a quietness born of necessity, her boots making almost no sound on the sandy soil. Behind the largest boulder, a man was sprawled in the sliver of shade. He was Apache. His long black hair was matted with blood and dirt. His buckskin leggings were torn and soaked through on one side. A closer look revealed a vicious gunshot wound high on his thigh, the flesh around it angry and swollen. Another gash bled sluggishly from his ribs. He was young, no older than her, his face a mask of pain. Every survival instinct screamed at her to turn around, get on her horse, and ride away. Fast. The Apache were at war. Cochise's son was leading raids against settlers, or so the rumors in Redemption Gulch claimed. To be found with this man, it was a death sentence. If his own people found her, they would likely kill her. If the cavalry found her, they'd hang her as a traitor. And if a man like Silas Kane found her, well, that would be worse than hanging. She saw the glint of a knife still clutched in his hand. He was an enemy, a warrior who would kill her without a second thought if he had the strength. But then her father's voice echoed in her memory, calm and clear from a time before the fire. You don't treat the uniform, Lyra. You don't treat the skin. You treat the wound. The man's chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged breaths. He was dying. Right here. Right now. Damn you, Papa, she whispered, her voice catching. The choice tore her in two. Leaving him was survival. Helping him was suicide. But as she looked at his face, contorted in agony, she didn't see a warrior. She saw a boy far from home, bleeding out under a hostile sun. She saw the same desperate cling to life she felt in her own heart. Holstering her pistol, she knelt beside him. Easy now, she murmured, the words feeling small in the vast, empty canyon. His eyes, black as a starless night, flickered open. They held no recognition, only a burning fever haze of pain and suspicion. He tried to raise the knife, but his arm was like lead, falling back into the dust with a soft thud. He was completely helpless. She uncorked her canteen, dipping her handkerchief into the precious water and gently dabbing at his cracked lips. He flinched at her touch but lacked the strength to pull away. That small act felt like crossing a line. There was no going back now. The wound in his leg was bad. The bullet was still in there. Infection was already setting in. He wouldn't last the night. The canyon was an oven by day and a freezer by night, crawling with predators, both four-legged and two-legged. Her decision wasn't a moment of heroic clarity. It was a quiet surrender to the person her father had raised her to be. "All right, devil," she sighed, more to herself than to him. "Let's see if we can't cheat the Reaper." Getting him on the horse was a nightmare. He was taller than he looked and all lean, solid muscle. He groaned in agony with every movement, his body a dead weight against hers. Lyra strained, sweat stinging her eyes, her muscles screaming in protest. Finally, by dragging and heaving, she managed to haul him over the saddle, slumping him forward against Dust Devil's neck. He was barely conscious. She tied his hands loosely to the saddle horn, not to restrain him, but just to keep him from sliding off. Before leaving, she took one last look at the ambush site. The tracks told a story. At least 3 riders, their horses shod, not Apache ponies. They had cornered him, shot him from a distance. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution that he had somehow, miraculously survived. With the wounded man secured, Lyra took Dust Devil's reins and began to walk, leading them away from the trail and deeper into the labyrinth of canyons. She knew a place, an old line shack her father had used on his long circuits, hidden in a box canyon. It was their only chance. As she walked, the immense weight of her choice settled on her. She was a fugitive now, harboring an enemy. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like the hoofbeats of a posse. She was carrying a secret that, if discovered, would bury her. What she couldn't know was the man's true identity, and she had no idea that this single act of compassion was about to set the entire territory on fire. The line shack was more ghost than building, its timber walls bleached gray by the sun. It was slumped into the side of a box canyon, hidden by a stand of junipers, accessible only through a narrow rock-strewn passage. It was here, in this forgotten corner of the world, that Lyra Vale went to work. The single room was thick with the dust of years. A simple cot, a rickety table, and a small stone fireplace were its only furnishings. After settling the Apache on the cot, his feverish moans a constant low thrum in the silence, she wedged a heavy log against the flimsy door and covered the single window with a tattered horse blanket, plunging the room into a dim, womb-like twilight. For the next 2 days, the world shrank to the size of that room and the man burning up inside it. She was no longer Lyra Vale, homesteader's daughter. She was a nurse, a guardian, a desperate bargainer with death itself. She used the last of her water to clean his wounds, her father's lessons guiding her hands. The gash on his ribs was easy enough, but the bullet in his thigh was a different beast entirely. "This is going to hurt like hell," she told his unconscious form, laying out her father's small surgical kit on a boiled cloth. A thin-bladed knife, a probe, and a pair of forceps. She sterilized them in the flame of a candle, her own hands trembling slightly. She'd only done this once before, on a ranch hand, with her father standing right over her shoulder. Now she was alone. She poured a generous amount of whiskey, the only anesthetic she had, down his throat. He coughed and sputtered, his eyes flying open for a moment, wide with panic and pain, before the fever pulled him back under. With a deep breath, she made the first cut. The man, Kyle, as she would later learn his name was, bucked on the cot, a strangled cry escaping his lips. Lyra threw her body over his torso, holding him down with all her weight, her face inches from his. "I'm sorry," she gritted out, tears of exertion and empathy blurring her vision. "Stay still. Just stay still." The probe found the lead slug lodged against the bone. Her fingers, slick with blood, worked the forceps into the wound. Time seemed to stretch and distort. The only sounds were Kyle's agonized breathing and the sickening scrape of metal against bone. Finally, with a sharp twist and a pull, the mangled piece of lead came free. She dropped it with a clatter into a tin bowl. Kyle went limp. his body finally surrendering to unconsciousness. Shaking and drenched in sweat, Lyra quickly packed the wound with a poultice of yarrow to stop the bleeding and willow bark to fight the fever, just as her father had taught her. She bandaged it tightly with strips torn from her own spare petticoat. For 2 more days he teetered on the brink. The fever raged. He thrashed in delirium, crying out in a language she didn't understand, harsh words that sounded like pleas and curses. In his lucid moments, his eyes would fix on her, not with gratitude but with a fierce animal suspicion. She was the enemy, a white woman, and her presence was a violation. He refused the water she offered, turning his head away until his body's own thirst betrayed his pride. He refused the broth she made from a scrawny jackrabbit she'd managed to trap. Then on the third morning, the fever broke. She awoke to find him watching her, his dark eyes clear for the first time. The suspicion was still there, but it was now tempered with something else. Confusion. He pushed himself up onto his elbows, hissing as pain shot through his leg. "Easy," Lyra said softly, not moving from her spot across the room. "You'll tear the stitches." He looked down at his bandaged leg, then at his ribs. He touched the clean dressing with a sense of wonder. His gaze returned to her, searching, questioning. "Water," she offered, holding up the canteen. He gave a single, curt nod. She brought it to him, letting him hold it himself. He drank deeply, his eyes never leaving hers. When he was done, he let the canteen fall to his side. The silence in the shack was thick, heavy with unspoken questions. He had been her patient, her prisoner, her burden for days. Now he was a man again, an Apache warrior, alone with a white woman who had, for some reason, saved his life. Finally he spoke. A single English word, rasped from a dry throat, a word that changed everything. Why? The question hung in the air between them. Why had she helped him? She wasn't even sure she could explain it to herself. It went against every instinct for survival she had. It defied the logic of this harsh land. She could have ridden on. She should have ridden on, but she didn't. She looked at this man, an enemy by every definition she'd ever known, and gave the only answer she had. "My father was a healer," she said simply. "He taught me to treat the wound, not the man." This seemed to satisfy him, or at least it was an answer he could file away for later. An unspoken truce settled over the small shack. They were still captor and captive, patient and nurse, Apache and settler. But for now, they were also two people in a shared, precarious solitude. But their supplies were dwindling. The water was nearly gone, and the rabbit broth wouldn't last. His leg needed fresh bandages and a stronger salve than she could make from the sparse local herbs. She had to go to Redemption Gulch. The thought sent a spike of fear through her. "I have to go for supplies," she told him the next day. "I'll be back by tomorrow night." His eyes narrowed instantly. He didn't trust her. Of course he didn't. He probably thought she was going to fetch the cavalry or a lynch mob. He said nothing, simply watching as she prepared to leave, his silence a heavy, accusing weight. "I'll tether your hands," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "I have to, but I will be back." He offered no resistance as she secured his wrist to the cot's frame with a length of rope, leaving enough slack for him to be comfortable. As she stood at the door, she looked back at him. His face was a stoic mask, but his eyes held a desperate plea that mirrored her own fear. She was leaving him helpless, at the mercy of whatever might find this hidden place, and she was walking into a town that would just as soon hang her for what she was doing. Redemption Gulch was a festering sore on the face of the territory. A single dusty street lined with a saloon, a general store, a blacksmith, and a sheriff's office, all simmering under the hateful sun. The air was thick with the smell of cheap whiskey, manure, and suspicion. As Lyra rode in, men stopped their conversations to watch her pass. A lone woman was a curiosity. A lone, capable-looking woman was a challenge. Her first stop was the sheriff's office. She needed to gauge the town's mood. Sheriff Beaumont was a man worn down by the land, barrel-chested with a face like a worn leather boot and eyes that had seen too much. "Miss Vale," he grunted, not bothering to stand. "Didn't expect to see you back in town so soon. Thought you'd be halfway to California by now." "Just needed some supplies, Sheriff," she lied smoothly. Decided to try my luck on a small plot north of the canyon. Bad territory, he warned, leaning back in his chair, which groaned in protest. The Apache have been raising hell. A prospecting party went missing up there last week. Found what was left of them yesterday. Wasn't pretty. He eyed her shrewdly. And Silas Kane has put a bounty out. 50 silver dollars for any hostile Apache, dead or alive. Seems one of his survey teams was attacked. Lyra's blood ran cold. $50. That was enough to make every desperate man in the territory a full-time bounty hunter. "I'll be careful, Sheriff," she said, keeping her voice even. Her next stop was O'Malley's General Store. Jebediah O'Malley was a kind, aging man who had been a friend of her father's. He greeted her with a warm, sad smile. "Lyra, child, it's good to see you. But what are you doing out here alone?" "I managed, Jebediah," she said, forcing a smile. She gathered what she needed: flour, bacon, coffee, and most importantly, carbolic acid and clean linen for bandages. As Jebediah was wrapping her goods, the bell over the door jingled and a shadow fell across the room. Silas Kane entered, flanked by two of his hired guns. Kane was handsome in a predatory way, with silvering hair at his temples and eyes the color of a winter sky. He dressed like a gentleman from back east, but his presence was pure frontier predator. He was the man who had stolen her family's land, the man whose name was a curse on her lips. "Well, well, Miss Vale," Kane said, his voice a low purr that sent a shiver of revulsion down her spine. "I heard you were still lingering. A dangerous choice for a woman alone." "I'm more resilient than I look, Mr. Kane," she replied, her voice tight. His eyes swept over her purchases, lingering on the carbolic acid and bandages. A flicker of interest crossed his face. "Ailment in your new camp?" he asked casually. "Just being prepared," Lyra said, her heart pounding. "It's a rough country. A person can get cut up." "Indeed," Kane said, his smile never reaching his cold eyes. "My men are out sweeping that country right now, looking for the Apache vermin that attacked my surveyors. They wounded one, but he got away. A slippery devil." He locked his eyes on hers. "If you happen to see anything at all, there's a handsome reward." The two men behind him, brutish and dirty, stared at her with open insolence. One of them, a man with a scarred lip and a missing finger on his left hand, spat a stream of tobacco juice near her boots. Lyra recognized him. He was one of the men she'd seen riding away from her homestead the day of the fire. The world seemed to shrink, the air growing thin. Kane wasn't just talking about any Apache. He was talking about her Apache, the man in her shack. She paid Jebediah, her hands shaking slightly as she took the parcel. "I'll keep an eye out," she said, her voice a stranger to her own ears. She walked out of the store, feeling Kane's eyes on her back, burning into her. The lie she was living felt like a shroud, suffocating her. She had just walked into the lion's den to buy supplies for the lamb, and the lion had just told her he was on the hunt. His men were out there, right now, sweeping the country, sweeping the very canyons where she had hidden her secret. She had to get back. Now. The ride back to the line shack was a frantic race against time and paranoia. The setting sun painted the canyon walls in hues of blood and fire. Every rock looked like a man lying in wait. Every gust of wind sounded like the whisper of a threat. Silas Kane's words echoed in her mind, a terrifying drumbeat. "My men are out sweeping that country right now." She slipped through the hidden passage, her senses screaming. She found Kyle as she had left him, tethered to the cot. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, immediately found the parcel in her hands. He watched her every move as she unpacked the supplies, his gaze lingering on the fresh bandages and the small brown bottle of carbolic acid. He understood. He knew the risk she had taken. "Town is not safe," he stated, his voice stronger now, the English words carefully chosen. "No," Lyra agreed, her back to him as she prepared a fresh dressing. "It's not." She turned, holding the new bandages. "They're looking for you. A man named Silas Kane. He's put a bounty on your head." At the mention of the name, a fire ignited in Kyle's eyes, a cold, hard fury that transcended pain. "Silas Kane," he repeated the name like a venomous hiss. "He is the one. His men." The pieces clicked into place for Lyra. The ambush wasn't a random act of violence. It was targeted. They ambushed you, she said, thinking aloud. Why? He looked away, his jaw tight. For a long moment, he was silent. The cultural chasm between them was vast and deep. Trust was a currency he did not spend lightly. Finally, he looked back at her, his gaze intense, as if weighing her very soul. My people, we know of a place, the Moon Sickness Rock. Moon Sickness Rock? Lyra asked, confused. It is what you call silver, he clarified. A great lode, hidden in the heart of the Dragoon Mountains, a place sacred to the Chiricahua. Cain has searched for it for years. He tortures my people for its location. He caught me alone, away from my warriors. He touched his bandaged leg. He did not want me dead. Not yet. He wanted the secret. Now she understood. The bounty wasn't just to have him killed. Cain wanted him found. The 50 silver dollars were meant to turn every settler into a pair of eyes for his manhunt. As she worked, gently cleaning the wound with the sharp-smelling carbolic acid, a new level of understanding passed between them. The silence was no longer empty but filled with a shared purpose. She was not just tending to a wounded Apache. She was shielding a secret that could get them both killed. He was not just a patient. He was the keeper of a sacred trust, hunted by a man she despised with every fiber of her being. My name is Lyra, she said softly, breaking the silence. He met her gaze. I am Kyle. It was a simple exchange, but it changed everything. They were no longer abstractions to one another, but individuals bound by a shared enemy and a desperate circumstance. Over the next week, a routine formed. Lyra foraged and hunted for small game, never straying far from the shack. Kyle's strength slowly returned. He began to sit up, then to stand, leaning heavily on a staff Lyra had fashioned for him. He taught her Apache words for water, tu, for horse, go, for danger, besh. She, in turn, read to him from the only book she had, a worn copy of Shakespeare's tragedies her mother had cherished. He listened intently, fascinated by the tales of kings and betrayal, of honor and revenge, recognizing the universal themes that transcended their different worlds. One afternoon, as she was mending her cloak near the fire, a glint of metal on Kyle's person caught her eye. Tucked into his waistband was the knife he had clung to when she found him. The hilt was unique, inlaid with a single polished piece of turquoise shaped like a hawk in flight. It was a beautiful, distinctive piece of craftsmanship, and her blood ran cold. Her breath hitched in her throat. She had seen a knife exactly like it before. Her mind flew back 2 years. Her father had been called out to treat a cattle baron who'd been thrown from his horse. Lyra had gone with him. The baron, a loud, boastful man, had been showing off a trophy from a skirmish with an Apache raiding party. It was a knife, its hilt inlaid with a turquoise hawk. Took it off the body of a chief's son, the baron had bragged. The boy's father, the war chief Nachai, came for it himself. Walked into my camp under a flag of truce alone and offered 10 prime horses for this trinket back. Said it was a symbol of his line. I told him to go to hell. Lyra looked from the knife back to Kyle's face, really seeing him for the first time. The high cheekbones, the proud set of his jaw, the regal bearing that even injury and squalor could not diminish. He was not just an Apache. He was not just a warrior. Nachai, she whispered the name, feeling it was a sacred, dangerous thing on her tongue. Your father is Nachai. Kyle's stoic expression broke, replaced by stunned surprise. He reached for the knife, his hand covering the turquoise hawk protectively. How do you know this name? The war chief of the Chiricahua, she said, her mind reeling with the implications. The stories say he is the most feared and respected leader since Cochise. You are his son. The wounded man she had carried on her horse, the fugitive she was hiding in a dirt-walled shack, was Apache royalty, the heir to the most powerful war chief in the territory. This changed everything. His capture or death wouldn't just be a victory for Cain. It would be a catastrophic blow to his people, an event that could trigger an all-out war unlike any the territory had ever seen. The secret she carried had just become crushingly, terrifyingly heavy. Their fragile peace was shattered 2 days later. Lyra was outside resetting her snares when she heard it. The distant, unmistakable sound of shod horses picking their way through the rocky terrain. More than one. Her heart leaped into her throat. She scrambled back to the shack, her mind racing. "They're coming," she hissed, bursting through the door. Kyle was already on his feet, his staff in one hand, his knife in the other. Pain was a distant concern. Primal instinct had taken over. "The window," he commanded, his voice low and urgent. "Take the horse. Go." "I'm not leaving you," she shot back, grabbing her Colt and her rifle. "They follow you. They find me. You are a woman alone. They will not suspect. Go now, Lyra." The voices were closer now, rough laughter echoing off the canyon walls. Peeking through a crack in the door, Lyra saw them. 4 riders. And leading them was the man from the general store, the one with the scarred lip and the missing finger. Lefty Pete, Kane's man, the man who had helped burn her home. Rage, cold and pure, washed over her. It wasn't just about saving Kyle anymore. This was about her father, her mother, her stolen life. "There's a fissure at the back of the canyon," she said, her voice a strained whisper. "It's a tight squeeze, but it leads up to the rim. We can climb." "My leg," Kyle stated, the words a grim admission of his weakness. "I'll help you," she vowed, her eyes locking with his. "We go together." A tense agreement passed between them. He nodded. They moved to the back of the shack. Lyra kicked loose a plank that had always been rotten, creating a small exit. They slipped out just as the riders entered the canyon's mouth. The posse saw Dust Devil tethered near the junipers and let out a triumphant whoop. "She's gotta be in that shack," Lefty Pete yelled. Kane was right. She bought medicine. Find the Apache scum. As the men dismounted and stormed toward the shack, Lyra and Kyle scrambled into the shadows of the canyon wall, heading for the dark slash of the fissure. The hunt had come to their doorstep. Their sanctuary was breached, and now their only hope for survival was a desperate vertical climb into the heart of the wilderness. The fissure was a wound in the rock, a narrow vertical scar that snaked its way up the canyon face. It was a climb that would have been treacherous for a healthy person. For a man with a freshly healed bullet wound in his leg, it was near impossible torment. "I can't," Kyle grunted, his body pressed against the rough sandstone, his knuckles white as he gripped a handhold. His injured leg trembled violently, refusing to bear his weight. Below them, the shouts of Kane's men grew louder as they discovered the empty shack and the escape route. "Yes, you can," Lyra insisted, her voice fierce, her own fear a metallic taste in her mouth. She was positioned just above him, her fingers raw, her muscles burning. "Give me your hand." She braced herself, finding a solid foothold, and reached down. Kyle looked up at her, his face a mask of sweat and agony. In his eyes, she saw the warrior's pride warring with the body's failure. He hesitated. "Kyle, now!" she commanded. He slapped his hand into hers. Her grip was like iron. She pulled, her entire body straining, the muscles in her back and shoulders screaming in protest. With a surge of adrenaline, she heaved him upward until he could find a new, more stable purchase for his good leg. "Again!" she panted. Inch by agonizing inch, they ascended the rock face, a desperate 2-person team against gravity and time. They could hear the men below cursing as they started to climb after them. A shot rang out, the bullet whining off the rock just inches from Lyra's head, showering them with stone fragments. "They're shooting!" she yelled, a fresh wave of terror spurring her on. They moved with frantic energy now, the fear of a bullet in the back overriding the pain. Kyle found a rhythm born of desperation, using his powerful arms to compensate for his weakened leg. Lyra was his eyes, finding the safest path, testing each handhold before he used it. They were a single entity, their survival intertwined with every upward pull. Finally, gasping for breath, they hauled themselves over the lip of the canyon rim and collapsed onto the flat, sun-baked mesa. They were exposed, but they were out of the fissure. Below them, Lefty Pete and his men were still struggling with the climb. "We have to move," Lyra gasped, forcing herself to her feet. "They'll be up here in minutes." The mesa was a brutal landscape, a wide-open expanse of rock and sparse, thorny scrub. To the north lay the distant, hazy outline of the Dragoon Mountains, Kyle's home. But between them and the mountains lay a treacherous, barren wasteland known as the Devil's Anvil. It was a maze of smaller canyons, sharp ridges and dead ends, known for its lack of water and its disorienting terrain. This way, Kyle said, pointing with his chin toward a series of jagged rock formations. He was thinking like a warrior again, his eyes scanning the land for tactical advantage. We use the land as a weapon. Their flight became a deadly game of cat and mouse. They had no horses, no water, and only a handful of bullets for Lyra's Colt. Their pursuers had all three, but Lyra and Kyle had something more valuable: knowledge. Lyra knew the general layout from her father's old maps, and Kyle knew how to read the terrain with an instinct that was in his blood. They left false trails, doubling back on their own tracks. They squeezed through gaps in the rocks too narrow for a horse, forcing their pursuers to dismount and waste time. The sun was a relentless enemy, beating down on them, draining their strength. Thirst became a constant, rasping torment. By late afternoon, they were cornered. They had followed a dry wash, hoping it would lead to a pass, but it ended abruptly in a sheer 100-foot drop. They were trapped on a narrow precipice. On one side, a fall to certain death. On the other, the way they had come, where Lefty Pete and his three men were now appearing, their figures silhouetted against the bright western sky. "Nowhere left to run, little lady," Lefty Pete called out, his voice dripping with malicious satisfaction. He dismounted, rifle in hand. "The boss, Mr. Kane, wants the Apache alive. Says he's got questions for him. As for you, he said we could have our fun." The other men chuckled, their leering eyes fixed on Lyra. The threat was sickeningly clear. Lyra raised her Colt, her hands surprisingly steady. "Stay back," she warned, her voice low and dangerous. Kyle stood beside her, armed only with his knife and his staff, his body poised like a cornered wolf. He was swaying slightly from exhaustion and pain, but his eyes burned with defiance. "That pea shooter ain't gonna stop the four of us," Lefty sneered, taking a step forward. "Drop it." Lyra's mind raced. They were out of options. A shootout was suicide. Surrender was unthinkable. Her eyes darted around the cliff edge, searching for any advantage. Her gaze fell on a section of the cliff face above where the men stood, a precarious overhang of loose rock and shale, barely clinging to the side of the canyon. An idea born of pure desperation sparked in her mind. "Kyle," she whispered without taking her eyes off the men, "the rock above them. Can you see it?" He followed her gaze, his eyes narrowing as he understood. It was a long shot, in more ways than one. "You got a bullet for the rifle?" he asked quietly. "No, I left it at the shack," she replied, her heart sinking. "Then the Colt must do it," he said. It was a pistol, inaccurate at this range, a nearly impossible shot. Lefty was getting impatient. "I ain't gonna tell you again." "It's too far," Lyra breathed, her hope fading. "You are a strong woman, Lyra Vale," Kyle said, his voice calm and steady beside her. "You have the eye of the hawk. Let your spirit guide the shot." His belief in her, so absolute in this final moment, was a strange and powerful gift. It chased away the fear, leaving only a cold, sharp focus. She took a deep breath, just as her father had taught her. Exhale slowly. Squeeze. Don't pull. She raised the Colt with both hands, bracing her arms. The front sight wavered over the distant rock formation. "What in the hell is she doing?" one of the men asked. Lefty Pete raised his rifle. "She's lost her mind. Shoot her." In that split second, Lyra fired. The crack of the pistol shot echoed through the canyon. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. The bullet was too small, the rock too solid. Lefty Pete grinned, his finger tightening on the trigger. Then a sound began. A low grumble. A single large rock detached from the overhang. Then another. A web of cracks spread across the formation. With a deafening roar, the entire section of the cliff face gave way. Tons of rock and earth cascaded down, a thundering, unstoppable avalanche. The men looked up, their faces frozen in disbelief and terror. They had no time to run. The rock slide engulfed them, a maelstrom of dust and violence. Their screams were cut short, swallowed by the roar of the collapsing earth. When the dust began to settle, the landscape was changed. The path they had taken was gone, buried under a massive pile of rubble. Of Lefty Pete and his men, there was no sign. There was only a profound ringing silence. Lyra stood, the Colt still extended, smoke curling from its barrel. Her arms were shaking uncontrollably. She had not killed them directly, but she had been the instrument of their end. Kyle placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch firm and grounding. "You saved us," he said, his voice filled with awe. She looked at him, her eyes wide with shock. She had just unleashed the fury of the mountain itself. They had survived. They stood on the edge of the world alone, the setting sun casting their long shadows across the land. The path ahead to the Dragoon Mountains was clear now, but the path behind them was buried forever. They had won the battle. But Lyra knew, with a chilling certainty, that when Silas Kane learned what had happened, the war would truly begin. The final leg of the journey was a pilgrimage of ghosts. The violence on the Devil's Anvil had left a pall over them, a shared trauma that needed no words. They traveled in a new kind of silence, no longer that of strangers, but of soldiers who had survived the same war. Kyle's strength was returning with each passing day. He led them with an unerring certainty through the foothills of the Dragoon Mountains, navigating the terrain as if they were the familiar rooms of his own home. They traveled by night, hiding and resting during the brutal heat of the day. Kyle taught Lyra how to find water where there appeared to be none, how to read the stars, and how to move without leaving a trace. She saw the land through his eyes now, not as an adversary to be conquered, but as a living entity to be respected. On the third night, they saw the fires. Tucked into a high protected valley was the Chiricahua stronghold, the Rancheria. It was larger than any settlement Lyra had ever seen, a sprawling village of wickiups and cook fires teeming with life. The sight was both a relief and a new source of terror. She had brought the war chief's son home, but she was still a Pindalikoyi, a white eye. She was the enemy. As they approached, 2 sentries seemed to materialize from the shadows, their rifles leveled. They barked a sharp question at Kyle. He responded in their tongue, his voice carrying an authority she hadn't heard before. He stood taller, no longer a wounded fugitive, but a prince returning to his kingdom. He gestured to Lyra, speaking at length. The sentry's expressions did not soften. One motioned with his rifle for them to proceed. They walked into the heart of the village. The news of Kyle's return spread like wildfire. People emerged from their dwellings, their faces a mixture of shock, joy, and disbelief. A woman, his mother, ran forward and embraced him, weeping. But as others saw Lyra, the joy curdled into suspicion. Murmurs followed them. The stares were like daggers. They saw her colt, her fair skin, her settler's clothing, and saw only an intruder. They were led to the largest wickiup, before which burned a great central fire. A man emerged and the entire village fell silent. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face a magnificent landscape of dignity and sorrow. His long, gray-streaked hair was held back by a simple leather band. His eyes, the same deep, piercing black as his son's, seemed to hold the wisdom and pain of his entire people. This was Nachai. He did not rush to embrace his son. He stood, his gaze sweeping over Kyle, taking in the dirty clothes, the lean hardness of his frame, the healing wounds. Then his eyes fell upon Lyra. It was the most intense scrutiny she had ever endured, as if he could see every fear she had ever held. Kyle stepped forward and spoke, his voice ringing with passion and conviction. He told them everything. The ambush, the wounds, waking to find the white woman tending to him. He told them of her courage, risking her life to go into the enemy town for medicine. He told them of the chase, the climb, and the final stand on the Devil's Anvil, where she had faced down 4 men and called upon the mountain itself to save them. When he finished, he turned to Lyra. For the first time in front of his people, he spoke to her in English, his voice clear and strong for all to hear. She did this not for bounty, not for fear, but because her heart is strong and her spirit is true. She honored me. She saved me. Silence. Nachai's gaze did not waver from Lyra. He took a step forward, his presence immense. He walked past his son and stopped directly in front of her. He said nothing. He simply looked at her, searching. Lyra met his gaze. She did not look away. She stood her ground, her heart pounding, and let him see her. She had nothing to hide. Whatever happened now, she would face it. Finally, after an eternity, Nachai reached out. He gently took her hand, the hand that had held the knife to cut him, the hand that had held the colt that saved him, and turned it over, palm up. He looked at her calluses, the dirt under her nails, the signs of her struggle. Then he looked back at her face and gave a single, slow nod. He had seen the truth. He turned to his people and spoke in their language, his deep voice commanding absolute respect. The hostility in the faces of the crowd softened, replaced by awe and a dawning understanding. They looked at her differently now, not as an enemy, but as the woman from their chief's son's story. That night, Lyra was given a place of honor at their fire. She stayed for 2 days, a strange and honored guest in a world she never knew existed. She saw the richness of their culture, the strength of their community, the deep love they held for the land that Silas Kane sought only to exploit. She hadn't just saved a man, she had saved a part of this world. On the 3rd morning, she knew it was time to leave. This was not her home. Nachai and Kyle met her as she was preparing Dust Devil, who had been found and cared for by Apache scouts. "You are welcome in this place, Lyra Vale," Nachai said, his English slow but clear. "You will always have safe passage through our lands." He gestured to a warrior who brought forth a magnificent bay stallion. "A gift. A life for a life." "I cannot accept," she started, but Kyle interrupted gently. "You will. To refuse is to say the life I have is worth less than this horse. It is not." She looked at him, this man she had found bleeding in the dust, now standing tall and proud, a future leader of his people, a bond forged in fire and blood, a bridge between 2 worlds that despised one another. "Thank you," she whispered, accepting the reins. She rode out of the rancheria the same way she came in, but this time, the faces she passed were filled with respect. Kyle walked beside her to the edge of the valley. "Where will you go now?" he asked. "I have a homestead," she said, a new resolve in her voice. "It was stolen from me. I think it's time I took it back." Kyle smiled, a rare, genuine smile that lit up his face. "Silas Kane has made a powerful enemy, Lyra Vale, not just of the Chiricahua, but of you. He does not know what is coming for him." They looked at each other one last time, a world of unspoken understanding passing between them. With a final nod, Lyra turned her new horse toward the east. She rode away not as a victim, not as a lonely survivor, but as a woman who had carried the son of a war chief across a canyon, and in doing so, had found her own strength. The West was still a crucible, but it had not burned her away. It had forged her into something new, something stronger, something unbreakable. The story of Lyra Vale is a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest courage isn't found in fighting an enemy, but in choosing to save one. It shows that even in the harshest of times, a single act of compassion can build a bridge between worlds. If you were moved by this story of bravery, sacrifice, and the unlikely bond forged in the American West, let us know by hitting that like button. Share it with someone who appreciates a story with real heart and grit. And if you want more lost chapters of history and dramatic tales like this one, make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching.